All right, everyone, welcome. This is our first flipped lesson in our AP language course over Henry David Thoreau. I'm hoping this is going to be met with success and will be one of many flipped lessons that we can encounter together over the school year. The purpose of this lesson is to dedicate more time in class to applying and analyzing what we're talking about together. So the flipped idea comes in the fact that we're opening up more class time for the application and analysis, and the introductory and background material is moved into the out-of-class setting. So flipping the script, you listening to me outside of class so that we can listen to each other and do more together. Here is just for me to explain before we get started your different expectations of watching this and when you come and bring it into class at the same time. When you enter class the day that this is due, you're expected to have fully absorbed and maintained your understanding of the material that's about to be presented to you. You can watch this as many times as you may need. It is a presentation that you can pause, to take notes, to rewind and write down information that you may have missed. And then you could keep this information with you for class and for future work. And since this is on the internet, you'll always be able to come back to it later on down the road when you write papers or want to refresh over some certain understandings. This will always be here. So what you're about to see is a normal slideshow presentation. Some slides will have brief texts. Some slides are simply pictures. So because of this, you need to listen closely to my narration as the key information is being spoken and is not blatantly displayed here in front of you. So with all that covered here, I would like for us to begin and to meet now Henry David Thoreau. Here's just some general background information about him. He was born in 1817. The Romantic time period that he belongs to is generally seen in the 1800s to the 1860s. So he's born here, in the early portion of this very influential time period. He was once quoted as having an early memory of staying awake at night just to look at the stars to see if God was actually behind them. So from a very early age, he was one of these deep, romantic, intuitive thinkers. It can be argued that Thoreau never stopped looking into nature for the truth. So nature is that recurring motif of transcendentalism and of romanticism. A little bit about Thoreau's family. His father was unsuccessful. He failed at keeping a store as a storekeeper, and he spent most of his life in some mundane job of making pencils. Thoreau's mother, however, was quite influential upon him, and he also had a brother, so she was influential to both of them. And she instilled in them her own deep interest in nature and stirred them this ambition to learn and to understand and to seek the truth. So the motherly role that she played was largely influential upon them. I mentioned his brother as a fatherly figure. I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about Thoreau's education, but it was his brother that worked hard and helped pay for Thoreau to receive higher education. So without his brother, he may not have become the person that he actually did become. Thoreau was often considered a loafer, lazy, crazy, eccentric figure by his neighbors that he grew up with, and he grew up in Concord. And he was seen as odd and far from being studious by his classmates. But because of his mother's influence on him and the help of his brother, Thoreau did receive a high-quality education and wound up enrolling in Harvard at the age of 16. So, these sneers and this, false kind of assumption of Thoreau in his early age didn't really seem to stick with him as he quickly grew out of it. And it was at Harvard that he began to develop the duality and the impression of him. As you see at the bottom here, it says just how he is both revered and loathed today. With Thoreau, what you see is what you get kind of thing. And a lot of people, that seemed kind of, intimidating. So in terms of this reverence of him, it was the strict curriculum and the college regulations at Harvard that caused him to rebel and you know just how society is today. We love our rebels. One comment of this is, at Harvard you had to wear a certain color suit jacket on campus, and Thoreau rebelled against it and wore green. So even going into the dress code, same issues that we see today, Thoreau rebelled to kind of keep his own personal identity. He was once stated that the curriculum and the information taught at Harvard was, quote, just the branches but none of the roots of the information. It was just very superficial to him. So this deep thinker that started looking at the stars at a young age, even at Harvard, did not receive the challenge that he wanted. So it was because of this rebellion, of this strong insight, that he was both revered and loathed back then and today at the same time. After his education, he wound up returning home to Concord and actually worked meagerly with his father, the pencil maker, for a lot of times. But had he not come back home, he would not have met Emerson. And you've already met Emerson. We've read Nature. We've started looking at self-reliance. Emerson, the forefather, the founder of this transcendental movement. And by coming back home, Thoreau wound up meeting Emerson and actually lived with him from 1841 to 1843 and was part of this transcendental club that Emerson had at his house. So around the clock, in the close vicinity, Thoreau was part of this transcendental lifestyle, of this transcendental movement, and by living with the forefather of transcendentalism. Thoreau and Emerson continued a strong friendship past his residency there into 1844, when Emerson purchased some land on Walden Pond. Thoreau, with Emerson's blessing, began building a cabin on this property, and this is what's going to dictate a lot of this presentation that's coming up. But as you can see on here, a key distinguishment between Emerson and Thoreau is on here. Emerson is seen as the thinker. He is the one that helped establish and birth this transcendental ideas of abandoning your obligations, shedding your obligations, finding your inner self, because until we truly know ourselves, we can't fully be functional and productive in society and actually give back. Because if we don't know who we are, how do we know if we're in the role that's meant for us? How do we know what we're doing is fully our potential? Emerson was a family man with kids and with a wife, and didn't necessarily abandon all of these obligations to do this. Thoreau is your doer. Living with Emerson, Thoreau's background with his parents and his brother, he was quickly on his own and was able then, because of the lack of kids and a wife at this early age, was able to then apply the thoughts that he so dearly loved of Emerson, and he himself as a transcendentalist. And you've got some analogies down here at the bottom. The machine and its product, Emerson, the machine of transcendentalism, producing something like Thoreau, who then can kind of pass down through generations this philosophy. The teacher and his pupil, Emerson teaching these philosophies, Thoreau being his pupil, his students, soaking it in, absorbing in the information, retaining it, and seeing its relevance later in life here. And then my favorite one here, the philosopher and the philosophy. They both believe these highly profound things, these philosophical ideas. And then Thoreau was able to embody it and to personify it and to actually put into action all of these thoughts to see, can you achieve these things? Or are we just thinking too deeply and too highly into irrational thoughts? The truth would then be in the execution. Can you find the truth? Can you find solace? Can we learn how nature is pure and innocent and unfiltered and unadulterated, and can we apply that to ourselves? So all of this is very important. Without Emerson, you would not have Thoreau. Now, I've mentioned here that he went into the woods, and here is a picture of a more modern-day replica of the cabin that Thoreau built on Emerson's property at Walden Pond. With Emerson's blessing, of course, Thoreau moved there on July 4th in 1845, and he maintained that residency for over 2 years with the intention of living simply and cheaply. And from the picture that you see here, at least from the outside, it looks like he was able to achieve that. Thoreau, in in his writing was very proud of the fact that he was able to get all of these materials from the woods around Walden Pond. He did have to go into town to get very few supplies, but even in his writing, he put the receipts and the tiny amount of money that he had to spend to build his establishment here. This is a marker here around the outskirts of Walden Pond where Thoreau lived. And this is the opening of Walden, the essay that he wrote while he was there. And it says, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die discovered that I had not lived." This is one of many Thoreau quotes that have received such celebrity here. And we're going to look very closely at this as we read portions of Walden in class together. So we'll come back to this idea and this sentiment after you've learned about Thoreau here and read some of his readings in class. So his notable years of where he has received such prestige here on the left was when he wrote Walden in this 2-year, 2-month time frame on your screen at Walden Pond. Again, his intention was to live simply and cheaply to thus apply the aspects of transcendental doctrines here on Emerson's land. He left his cabin in September of 1847 and took what he wrote while he was there for 2 years, publishing it and calling it Walden. Oftentimes you may see it called, Where I Went and What I Lived For, or some kind of variation of that. This is one of 2 most notable events to happen while living at Walden Pond. On the right side of your screen is the name of an essay called Civil Disobedience. Thoreau was arrested and thrown into jail while living at Walden Pond because he refused to pay a poll tax of $1.50 that had accrued over a 6-year time frame. He refused to pay it because he believed against the Mexican-American War and slavery, and thus paying tax to a country that believed in such a thing like that was not something that Thoreau wanted to associate with. And because he refused, he was thrown into jail, but only for one night. An unknown person that is actually said to have bailed him out. Many people believe that it was his aunt to have bailed him out. But while he was in jail, it influenced him to write what is now dubbed Civil Disobedience, and is his most famous single essay that he ever wrote. And it was because of this nonviolent action that has then inspired such nonviolent protests that has been seen across our country, and some that we're going to look at here in just a minute. Along with Walden and Civil Disobedience, Thoreau then decided to travel to give many lectures, but rarely found success, as people viewed him as a very poor speaker who seemed to only like the sound of his own voice and his own words instead of really connecting with his audience and relaying his message to them. And his popularity was not much improved even a half a century after his death, as many people viewed him as, quote, a poor shadow of Emerson, a mere woodsman and hermit whose nature writing was weakened by this tedious moral philosophy. However, Thoreau's words and tones were often and are still often misunderstood. That's not how he should be portrayed. Those people who portray him as that are ones who really don't seem to understand what he has to say. Thoreau actually found greater joy in his daily life than most other people ever did or still do today. He spent 2 years in solitude in a cabin, thinking and writing, and then decided to share his insights on life and what he gained from nature with the world. And eventually the tides did shift, and Thoreau's reputation has steadily increased, and here in recent years drastically risen, as his writings are some of the most widely read and most influential writings of any transcendentalist, including the creator and leader, Emerson himself. So, with all of this, here's another kind of thinking of Thoreau after leaving Walden Pond here. Never look back unless you're planning to go that way. We're very nostalgic, reflective kind of people. We get such cliches of, live your life with no regrets. If I could do it again, I'd do it the same. It's these kinds of ideas that never look back unless you're planning to regress. And it was this idea of regression versus progress that influenced a lot of Thoreau and transcendental kinds of philosophies that you kind of see